Let's get into the conversation right now with Rita Panahi, with Senator Matt Canavan and with Nicholas Rees. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. You take your pick. They all join us now, of course, from different parts of the country right now. So let's talk about these clowns today who are out there adding to carbon emissions by burning prams, setting off flares. Yet, Matt, it would have been nice if they actually went to the country that is going to do nothing by 2030, can continue to up its emissions, can cover Australia every 16 days. Forget the Lodge, forget Parliament House. Feel free to go down to China for some education.
Paul, you're spot on. You're spot on with your commentary, but these activists, these insurrectionists, that's what I'm calling them, Paul. They're insurrectionists. They've defaced the heart of our Australian democracy.
Oh my God.
Because they have been they're not trying to change the climate, they're trying to change the government.
Correct.
That's what these guys want to do. They want to change the government. In fact, they don't just want to, and I'm not saying to Nicholas, I don't think they want a Labor government. I think they'd be quite happy with a Communist Party government, these insurrectionists. That's what they want.
Oh, yes.
They want to change our whole society. They want to change the way we do things. They hate capitalism. And this whole climate change caper is just a front for their very radical agenda. And that radical agenda is exposed by the behaviour today, and anyone who associates with them should lose all respect in our community, because these people have no respect for our community, for our democracy. Now, the Australian Greens in this place today, they were standing up in question time and taking the requests and demands of these insurrectionists seriously and putting them to the government and giving them a level of protection. And the Australian Greens should be condemned by one and all for associating themselves, being accomplices effectively to these types of people. In fact, in the past protests, the Greens have signed in the likes of these people to the Parliament House that have then done damage to the Parliament House. Fortunately, no one can be signed in at the moment because of COVID, so they couldn't do that caper today. But they must be condemned, Paul. It is an absolute outrage. Everyone has the right to protest, but you do not have the right to deface and damage public property.
Well, but and also here's Adam Band singing off the song sheet today in the Parliament, remember? Full of condemnation for protests a couple of weeks ago. Absolute high fives for what they saw today.
It's clear that Scott Morrison and his band of climate criminals will not do what it takes to cut pollution by 2030.
I mean, but also, Rita, don't you love this here? The problem is what is being put into the atmosphere, so let's burn stuff to put more in the atmosphere. And you know what? They've completely distracted from the report. They've completely distracted from the politics. They've made this the story today.
They haven't. They have been cheered on by the Greens. It wasn't just Adam Ban. Nick McKim actually tweeted a picture of the young lady burning the pram, and I think he called her... He said, thank you for your courage and action. So I'm sorry, is that now courageous in Australia in 2021, doing such a pathetic stunt, a stunt that is actually damaging to the environment in itself? And it's just hysterical. If this is how they want to convince mainstream Australia to their cause, then they are going to lose, and they're going to keep losing more elections. And it's up to Labor to distance themselves from this radical far-left Green agenda, because don't forget, Labor and the Greens are in bed together. They swap preferences. They'll
that's right.
vote in unison,
they take their preferences.
and they need to distance themselves from this utter lunacy, and that's what it is. And you look at Extinction Rebellion's founders and what they have espoused over the years, they are radical far-left Marxists who want to dismantle capitalism. Their aims go far beyond the environment. If they really wanted to radically reduce emissions, they'd be pushing nuclear. And we've actually spoken on this station to a former Extinction Rebellion spokeswoman who abandoned the group when she looked at what they were actually saying and how many lies they were espousing. And now she is a pro-nuclear advocate, because she does want to cut emissions, but she doesn't want to destroy people's living standards.
Yeah, one more of these so-called freedom fighters cheered on by the Greens when, of course, they yelled at people for protesting a couple of weeks ago. Let's be consistent. BLM, the protest a couple of weeks ago, and this crap today, all of it not on. Have a look.
No. We have a duty to act. Nobody is allowed to ignore this.
Apart from anything, Nicholas, that sort of wastage of tomato sauce I am desperately disappointed by. I want a good Village sausage roll. I'd mop it all up. So help us out. These guys completely distracted from the chat we could have had tonight about the intergovernmental report, right? They could have had a conversation about the cost of transition and all the rest of it. Instead, the very people who were blowing a gasket 2 weeks ago, dead silent, in fact, exactly the opposite a few days later.
Well, I mean, look, they're clowns, they're, knuckleheads, and 8 of them arrested today, and so it should be. But, and look, and well done to you, fine bit of oratory there. You're somehow wrapped into a beat-up on China, Labor. Matt had a crack at the Greens, like you really got them all wrapped up beautifully in a fine bit of rhetoric there. But let's
which bit is factually
waste any more time. Let's not waste any more time talking about those clowns. Let's talk about the UN IPCC report. 234 of the world's leading climate scientists ringing the bell, Paul, running up the red flag and saying, we have a climate emergency. Temperatures are rising.
Hand in hand. Like we had last year.
Then we had previously
like we had a decade ago.
For Australia, that means turbocharging bushfires, turbocharging floods, destruction of the reef. Like this is a serious issue that we should be debating.
That's had its best growth in 10 years.
Not talking about those clowns out the front of Parliament House. Okay,
Paul,
let's not spend another second on them and start talking about the serious challenge.
He's one step away from pulling out a bag of sauce and pouring it over his head. I mean, Nicholas, he actually kind of looks like the bloke you just showed. That could have been brothers. And really, this is just another form of it. I mean, just bring in a pram and set it on fire, Nicholas, because what you're saying is really not that divorced from that sort of rhetoric. That is emergency, it's the end, it's a catastrophe. It's not. And you've cried wolf too many times. People don't believe this anymore because we've heard this 10 years ago. We heard it 15 years ago. We heard it with Al Gore's film. And, you can't keep catastrophizing and expect people to come with you. You've got to just be a bit more measured in your language.
All right, everyone, here's the rundown. Right, this is the plan. Gone, okay? Matt, what do you want to say to Nick?
I just want to say here one thing to Nick. At what point will the Labor Party decide that they cannot take preferences from this radical crime-supporting mob called the Australian Greens? We made a principled decision in our party decades ago not to take preferences from one nation when they were saying xenophobic things. Now, those days are a bit behind us, but back then they were saying some outrageous things, and we made a principled decision, despite it costing us politically, to stand up for our principles and values that we believed in equal treatment of all people of all races. We made that decision. But the Australian Labor Party continues to take preferences and do political deals with a political party in this place that is condoning and encouraging people who vandalise the Australian Parliament House. So what will it take for the Labor Party to separate themselves and sever for themselves from this radical group who are encouraging criminals?
Well, Matt, I mean, far be it for me to defend the Greens, but it wasn't the Greens out the front of Parliament.
Well, you're in bed with them.
It was those Extinction Rebellion numbsculls. It wasn't the Greens. Who do you think they're voting the Greens there?
The Greens are backing them.
Them up as the Oogie Booger man.
Well, can I read you this tweet from Nick McKim?
From Matt, though.
Can I read you the tweet from Nick McKim? I'm sure we can get up on screen at some point tonight. So he put a picture up of the young lady with the pram on fire next to her. And this is what he said. You tell me whether this is supporting this mob or not. He said, "Thank you for your courage and action. We are literally stealing the future from our children and grandchildren. There is still hope, but we need to act now. We draw electoral support from parties that refuse to act in line with climate science." That's the full tweet there. Now, tell me, does that sound like someone who is encouraging more of that sort of protesting, or someone who's trying to stop it? Come on, I mean, be frank here. That is a fairly blatant support of what we saw today. He's put up a picture and he's saying she was courageous.
So I'm sorry, these are all silly games. Who cares what Nick McKim tweets? What I want to know to Matt Canavan is...
You put him in the Parliament.
Going to stop being a blocker.
You put him,
you
give him preferences.
Matt, you have a vote in these things, Matt. When is your party going to embrace net zero emissions by 2050?
When are you going to do what Nick McKim wants to do?
70%.
What?
Biden's gone to 55%. So when are
this
you
is-
going
And
to sign
China
up
keeps
to
doing this
This is,
since
hang on, you're
2030.
changing the topic here. You're changing the topic because you cannot defend the Australian Labor Party's contemptible deals that they do with this criminally supporting mob called the Australian Greens. You put Nick McKim in the parliament. You gave him preferences. In fact, he nearly lost his job a few years ago, but for preferences from the Australian Labor Party.
Correct.
And so you get out there and say you support jobs and you support workers, and then you go along and do a deal with this mob who wants to put thousands of Australians out of work, who are supporting and facilitating behaviour that goes to the heart of destroying our democracy in this country. You have no credibility, the Australian Labor Party, while ever you continue to remain in bed with the Australian Greens. And you are in bed with them. We can all see it.
Matt, I'm just a guy sitting here in a TV studio. You sit in the federal parliament. You have a vote on these things. When are you going to support net zero emissions by 2050?
All right, now, I want to ask this question of you.
So he wants you to vote with Nick McKim. Is that what he's saying? He basically wants you to back the guy who's just been backing the pram burners.